Mainstream media has seen a major decline in traffic following the departure of former President Trump. According to Axios, news sites saw a decline in political consumption in February, 28% so far.
Democratic strategist Colin O'Hara and our colleague national political reporter at The Hill, Jonathan Easley, are back to share their thoughts. Jonathan, let me start with you on this. They say publishers' traffic was down across the board. Major sites saw traffic dip more than 20%. Politics consumption dropped most dramatically, tumbling 28%. Just talk about what has happened in the Biden era and how people are shifting their news and consumption habits, and what do you think it ultimately means for these media outlets?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating phenomenon. I mean, in a lot of ways, media outlets were bracing for this, sort of knowing they've been feasting off Trump for 4 years, and really that continued through the early part of the year, obviously, with interest in the Capitol riots, interest in the transition, and even interest in the first few weeks of how the Biden administration was going. But I think what we're seeing right now is sort of a natural pullback. I mean, in a lot of ways, I think the appetite to consume news about Trump was warranted. I mean, he's a phenomenon that's worth understanding. It's very peculiar moment, I think, in American politics that generated a lot of interest, clicks, ratings up across the board. And so we're seeing this sort of natural pullback, and it's going to be very interesting to see how the media responds to that and what coverage looks like going forward. I mean, I think there's going to still be a focus on Trump quite a bit, just because he does drive traffic, but it's also time, I think, for the media to move on and maybe cover Biden with the same aggressiveness that we saw the media apply to Trump.
Yeah, well, that's the interesting part, Colin. I mean, from this perspective, what political consumption and news consumption is a proxy for voter interest, right? And so now that things have calmed down, a 30% drop means a less engaged population. What does that mean for Democrats' chances in the post-Trump era when you have so many people who are activated on Trump alone? And this is a problem for the GOP, too. But from the Dem perspective, what do you think?
Well, first of all, from the country's perspective, let's just all say, thank God, politics is relatively boring again, at least in short term. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And with the passage of these bills, that actually makes me happy. Not so maybe happy for news entities' bottom lines. I know they've been hit hard here. However, what I would actually say is that the Biden campaign needs to take note of this. And the Biden administration needs to take note of this. The DCCC, the DSCC, every organization dedicated to electing Democrats should be paying very close attention that news consumption around politics is down. And that means they really need to hone in their message and need to start putting their messengers out in front of the public so that when the public is tuning in, they are getting the message that they need from those folks who want to communicate a message on behalf of Democrats. And that should start with the Biden administration. They've got to be more forceful and more clear about everything they're doing and what they want to accomplish, and it should follow down the chain from there. If they do not do that, then you create a vacuum for the Republicans to naturally fill. And they'll fill it, and they're good at filling it. So I would encourage Democrats to pay very close attention to this and become much more active first and much more concise about what message they're going to try to communicate as we move into the 2022 elections.
Yeah. I mean, Jonathan, another stat that they have here that's really interesting is Biden was discussed on cable news for about 1,836 minutes during February. Compare that to February of Trump's first year. He garnered 4,669 minutes on cable news. So vastly more coverage of Trump in his second month versus Biden. And I actually think that this is a big challenge for Republicans because they haven't really been able to demonize Biden in the super effective way that they were able to do with Hillary Clinton or with Barack Obama. They've been kind of flailing around trying to get something to stick, and so far nothing really has garnered that level of animus that they're so dependent on for their own ratings.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you're seeing really in conservative media right now is some of the heat moving away from Trump and being put into the culture wars, which is obviously, these debates around censorship and big tech and these kinds of things, which is why you're seeing, Dr. Seuss trending and whatnot. I mean, those are in their own ways important stories, but it does seem like that's where, those issues animate the conservative base as much as Trump does. And that's why you saw the focus on those issues at CPAC the other week and that kind of thing. So I think that's sort of, what you're going to, the trend you're going to see there. And, I will, just to echo what Colin said, though, it's hard not to see this drawback in political news consumption as anything but good. I mean, it's really the last 4 years has really torn the country apart, because half the country was waking up in the morning and logging on to social media or turning on cable news to be outraged at Trump's latest, aggression, and the other half was turning it on because they were interested in seeing him defended and very passionate about what he was doing. And I think probably the hope is that this drawback ends up being sort of a healthy thing for the nation and sort of a return to normalcy in the Biden years.
I certainly agree. I just really wonder how return to normalcy is going to scramble things, given how much. I don't know. What are the indicators we would look for, Colin, in 2022 of a quote unquote return to normalcy for an election, from your perspective?
I think you're going to have to return to core issues that really matter to people, and you're going to have to hear people talking about how they're specifically going to solve them, right? I mean, so much of the messaging was anti-Trump in response to Trump, and I'm going to take a stand against Trump. He's no longer there. So let's talk about getting some things done. Let's talk about lowering the cost of healthcare. Let's talk about lowering the cost of education. Let's talk about things like we talked about before, raising the minimum wage and how we're going to do it. So bottom line, Democrats need to talk about how they're going to give people a better life over the next 2 and 4 years if they want to be reelected and have the jobs again. And I think they've got a plan to do that. They've just got to be able to communicate it really, really well. And right now, they're not doing that. Now, there's some transition inside the Democratic Party, as there is inside of the Republican Party, but they really need to get their spokespeople out there talking and doing so with some swagger, right? Like having enough vaccines for every adult in America ready by May. Like, you ought to be walking around and talking a whole lot of trash about that. That's a hell of an accomplishment. And then passing the infrastructure bill that's going to put, I mean, look, how long did we talk about Trump checks? They're getting bigger checks than Trump checks, okay? And Joe Biden isn't talking about putting his name on them, but Democrats should be talking about the fact that they helped provide those to people, and they're not doing that right now. I would encourage them to do so, and do so immediately.
Yeah. Great points all the way around. Just want to say rising numbers are doing just fine in the Biden.
That's right. Actually, better than ever.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, guys. Great to see you both.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
And we'll have more rising for you after this.